Welcome, everybody, to the roundtable reunion discussion of Commitment to Life and some of the key players that made Commitment to Life happen. First, let's start off by introducing ourselves. I'm Ron Sylvester, served as the executive producer of Commitment to Life.
I'm Jeffrey Schwarz. I am the producer, director, and editor of Commitment to Life.
I am Aimée Flaherty. I produced the project with Jeffrey.
Hi, and I'm Allyson Newman. I was the composer.
I guess probably the best way to start is kind of at the very beginning, kind of what was the impetus of the creation of this film. And I was pretty much in one of the only ones involved in that segment of the production process here. I was a member of the board of directors of APLA, which is also our fiscal sponsor and also kind of our subject matter of the film. And as the organization was reaching its 40th anniversary, they wanted to come up with some great ideas as to how to, celebrate that, how to commemorate those 40 years. And the board put together a committee, which I was on, and we began to discuss ideas. And of course, it was, a banquet, a this, a that. And then it was Craig Thompson, who is the CEO, brought up the idea of revisiting the Commitment to Life events. Now, if you don't know, the Commitment to Life events were these huge fundraisers in Los Angeles during the height of the AIDS crisis. And it basically mobilized the entertainment industry to respond to what was going on in the world or in the country. The fact that AIDS was being ignored by the administration, not a lot of money was being allocated to research and development. They realized they had to raise their own money and do their own research. So these events started and they became huge celebrity extravaganzas, if you will. Everybody wanted to show up, everybody wanted to perform, everybody wanted to lend their support because it was affecting the industry. Friends were dying left and right, and there was nothing being done. That's what the event was. So Craig said, I'd really like to revisit those. No one has seen these tapes of these shows in years and years and years, and I think it would be the perfect time to resurrect this. And we all loved the idea and thought it would make a great little short film that we would show at the banquet. It was the germ of the idea, and it grew and it grew and it grew. And basically, the film took over the centerpiece of the 40th anniversary. In fact, we scrapped the event, obviously because of COVID and other issues. But as we began to peel away the layers of the onion, we realized the story that we had was not just about the event, but it was about Los Angeles. It was about the community. It was about how LA responded to the AIDS crisis, which really hadn't been told before. Most people knew what happened in New York, San Francisco, but it was that entertainment response that really hadn't been told. So we realized that we had something bigger on our hands, and it was a feature film. I was the only one around the table that had film experience. I'm a producer and director. I also have run film festivals. So this kind of ended up in my lap. And I was kind of charged with kind of making this thing at least begin to happen and see if we could begin to happen. And Jeffrey and I had known each other for years on the film festival circuit. I ran the Long Beach Film Gay and Lesbian Film Festival and it programmed a lot of his other works. Still feel he's one of our preeminent LGBT historians and was loving the opportunity to work with him. So basically got Jeffrey involved and in an interview. And, what was your experience, Jeffrey? Like when I think I remember that first phone call, and I think you were like, oh my God, this is a story I've wanted to tell.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those phone calls that you get that you know is going to change the next several years of your life. And I've always loved Hollywood. I've always loved the story, the history of Hollywood, and especially the LGBTQ contributions to Hollywood, which were so often never really spoken about openly or had to happen behind closed doors. And there were so many queer people in Hollywood, obviously, over the decades, but not a lot who were out. And what AIDS did was sort of force people to be open because there was like physical, you would physically know that people were suffering from AIDS, right? And there was such fear at the time and such stigma, and particularly in Hollywood, where there were so many gay men working in the industry, because of the fear and stigma, people felt that they had to hide their diagnosis. And there are so many stories about that. But then on the other hand, there were also some who made a different choice that decided to sort of be open about their status, right? So this is a story that is just so compelling. Elizabeth Taylor famously was an activist for many years, and I remember, when this was all going on, how she really emerged as our champion, and she was the best friend that our community ever had. So when Ron called to talk about making this movie, it was just like that. Oh my God, this is a dream come true. I think one of the first questions I had was, what footage exists from all these incredible commitment to life events? Because I'd never seen any. I'd seen a few clips here and there on YouTube, but there were the first event what was that Elizabeth Taylor hosted was in 1985, and that was also the year that Rock Hudson's diagnosis was announced. It was also the year of the first AIDS walk, so it was a big year, 1985. Aimée came aboard to produce the film, and that was one of the first things we started to do is start to figure out what existed. And APLA, now APLA Health, they had the material, but it was sitting in boxes and it hadn't been touched in many, many, many years. Because the thing about the archival was that it's APLA AIDS Project Los Angeles, meaning that it was just a project that wasn't going to last forever. Like the idea was we were gonna beat this thing. Here we are, more than 40 years later, and the story's still being written. But that material existed. I remember the day when Aimée sent all these boxes to my house, and they pulled up in front of the house, and like box after box after box came in. Just opening it up, there were just tapes, a lot of unlabeled tapes, VHS tapes. So the first thing to do was figure out like what was there. The Commitment to Life fundraisers were all videotaped. And one by one, going through tapes, I found a tape. It was one VHS tape that was the original Commitment to Life event, the first one that Elizabeth Taylor hosted, and all of the people that she had to perform and to give speeches. Rock Hudson had just announced his diagnosis, so this was still new. So friends of his were at this, like Burt Lancaster came and wrote a beautiful letter. Burt Reynolds was there, Carol Burnett, Sammy Davis Jr., and apparently it was really difficult to get a lot of those people to attend the ceremony because people didn't want to be associated with it. Either people would think because of the homophobia of the time, if you were to appear at an AIDS event, people would just think you're gay, and that would be the worst possible thing that could happen to you. So somebody like Burt Reynolds, a macho man, straight actor, to show up at this thing, I give him a lot of credit for that. So anyway, that's where the whole process first started, was figuring out what the materials were, and then who are we going to get to tell the story? Who's still around to tell the story? Because we've lost so many people, but luckily there were a lot of really, really key, important people in the story that we were able to interview. And then Aimée and I started, and Ron, you two started we made our list. We started reaching out and engaging with people. This was all right
A
before.
lot of Zoom calls during COVID. 'Cause
Well, okay,
we haven't even addressed the fact that pre-production started and like COVID hit.
Aimée, do you remember how we first started having our meetings with APLA? It was before COVID.
Yeah, it was actually APLA granted us the project mid-February, maybe towards the end of February, and we had our first production meeting, and it was just like days before COVID. Then COVID hit, and we had no idea what we were going to do. Like, is this going to happen? Are we going to move forward with this? Or it was wild, but we did. We said, okay, we're just going to keep moving forward. So I remember when working with the APLA, and when those boxes, I think 27 boxes of archival footage was dropped off in Jeffrey's living room. And it was great. It was great to be continuing to move forward. And it was very poignant because, the HIV crisis, and then being in COVID and being in a similar sense of unknown and fear, and, trying to figure out how to film safely, how to do all of this. It was really interesting times to be making a film like this.
Yeah, we also had a handful of people who were not in the film who I think if we didn't have COVID, they would have been. They were just fearful of exposing themselves to the crew or whatever.
There were a lot of people that it was very courageous for the people who did come out. And then some people just couldn't because they couldn't come out during the COVID period. But it was great. We actually had a house donated to us, which we utilized for the majority of our interviews here in Hollywood. And just really gave us an opportunity to have a safe space where people could come and just feel that they could be open and just talk about their experience.
And also, I think it was more about how can we pare down this crew as opposed to bring in as many people as we can, because at that period, that's what the sensitivity was, having body. I mean, literally, it was only essential bodies in the room. There were plexiglass dividers and things like that, right?
I mean, it was really essential for us because it is a very sensitive subject matter. And, it's very vulnerable for someone to come sit with us just in general in normal times and talk about a very painful experience that they had. And then to do it in a time of, additional fear with being safe with COVID. So we really just needed to make sure that we provided an environment that they could just feel free to really be open and it worked and they were wonderful. And
Yeah, Jeffrey, share some of your experiences with sitting across from some of these folks who probably for the first time in years and years and years revisited this whole very, very dark time in our community. I think you probably had a lot of kind of cut, we need to give them a minute type things, correct?
Absolutely. I guess the first challenge was to engage with these folks and to try to build a trust because, like you said, a lot of them hadn't really processed this, and there is PTSD with so many of these folks who lived through it, and they just don't want to go there. So, like for example, Bill Meisenheimer, who was the first director of APLA, at the very, very beginning, it's so painful. He was working at APLA during the day and he was caring for his best friend who was very ill at night. So it was 24/7 for him. And all the emotions are still there, even though this was 40 years ago, it's still right there. So a lot of folks just were not ready to do it. And it took some coaching or some coaxing to kind of talk them into doing it and to trust us and to really tell them how important their own personal stories are because there's a whole generation now who weren't around when this was all going on, and this is like, to be honest, it's like ancient history to them, and they don't know what happened. So yes, trying to get people to participate was a challenge, but then we were able to get the people we wanted, and then the other challenge was, okay, are you willing to leave your house for the first time in many months because you've been with COVID, you've been isolated. Oh, and also you've had HIV for 40 years. Are you willing to risk that too? So it was a big leap of faith on people's behalf. I mean, we did our best to keep people safe, like Amy said, but it was still, there was still obviously there was always going to be some level of risk, but we were as careful as we could possibly be. But there were all these parallels. Everyone who we sat down with, we're talking about all the parallels from the early days of HIV to the early days of COVID, the early days of HIV when people were getting sick and nobody knew what the cause was before they knew it was a virus. People thought it might be airborne. People thought it might be in poppers. People thought all these things were going
Caused by the
on.
sun.
Yeah, they would call it, disco tumors, the horrible things. So, when people would get sick, a lot of folks didn't, even queer people, like didn't want to go visit them. So people would show up to visit their friends like in full hazmat suits, or even doctors and nurses. They wouldn't want to treat people with what became known later as AIDS because they didn't know. So people would be isolated in hospital rooms and food would be left out on trays in front of the door and people died alone. And that was very similar to what happened in the early days of COVID. Before we really knew what was going on with COVID, people were dying alone. And at least with COVID, we had the ability to, like families were able to talk to their loved ones over Zoom and say goodbye to them. It's just heartbreaking stories. We're a couple of years away from this, a few years away from that now, but we can't forget those early days and how scary and terrible that was and how many people we lost. So yes, I mean somebody like Reverend Steve Peters, he was at the top of our list. That was somebody that Ron, you said we must talk to Steve, and Steve was the first member of the clergy to go public about having HIV. Was unfortunately we lost him since we made the film, but he was a longtime survivor of HIV. But he was also one of the people who was a great communicator, and he was the one who went on Tammy Faye Baker's PTL club as a person with AIDS to talk to Tammy, who was very sympathetic to the gay community at a time when a lot of people weren't, especially the Christian fundamentalists who were televangelists. She was one of those people who actually cared. And Steve sat down with us to share that whole experience. Phil Wilson is another person that has lived with this story for decades and shared the story of him and his partner and a really heart-wrenching story about his partner's illness, Chris Brownlee's illness, and their activism and starting a hospice for people with AIDS that was named for Chris. And,
Mhm.
there's so many stories that we could go on for hours talking about all the different people, but just watch the movie and you'll find out.
And in retrospect, I think our timing was uh, very good, and because most of the people that had lived that period are now getting in an advanced age, and also they may not be with us physically and or mentally to be able to sit down and have these cognitive conversations. And I think we really got lucky in terms of timing. Like you mentioned, we've had a few people pass away since the production. We've also had, a few people who, if you sat them down today versus 3 or 4 years ago when we did, I don't think we would have gotten the same interview from them as well. So we were very fortunate, and that was one of the urgencies behind producing the film. We're like, we're losing this generation very quickly, and these stories need to be told. And that was kind of the impetus to why now, in addition to attaching it to a 40th anniversary. Jeffrey, also talk a little bit about how the story expanded like tremendously and how you dealt with kind of making, I think the first cut was like 4 hours long, something like that. I mean, we were trying to, shove 10 pounds of stuff in a 5 pound bag. But
Yeah, it was really a challenge to figure out what story we wanted to tell because, like you said earlier, that story of Hollywood hasn't really been fully told. That we've had other great, brilliant documentaries about other aspects of this crisis, like How to Survive a Plague, which focused on New York and ACT UP, and We Were Here, David Weissman's We Were Here, which really focuses just on San Francisco. But we wanted to focus on Los Angeles, our city, and Hollywood is the primary industry in our town. And that was the story we wanted to tell. But there were a lot of other stories, and Hollywood isn't the be all and end all of Los Angeles. There were other communities that APLA was trying to serve, sometimes was able to serve. Sometimes there were issues with their ability to serve other communities, the African American community, the transgender community, the Latino community. So we wanted to make sure that we told the story of an entire city and that we sort of in a casting process of figuring out who were the best people to tell these different parts of the story. To talk about APLA, we had people that were former board members, people that were volunteers, to tell the story, sort of the medical side of things. We had people like Dr. Michael Gottlieb to talk about the science of HIV and AIDS. And we had people like Bruce Valanche to talk about Hollywood. And we had people like Bambi Salcido to talk about the trans community. And it really was so emotional because you're sitting down to tell this story that is so personal and so intense. I mean, I don't know about you all, but it's pretty rare when you're doing an interview and the subject is crying, the director is crying, the sound man is crying, the camera person's crying, everyone in the crew is crying, and
right.
it was just really intimate and special. I get asked a lot whether APLA Health had any editorial input on the film or kind of pushed me in one direction or another. And I have to say, like, they were actually incredible because you know, the APLA story is sometimes not a happy story, and sometimes there's a lot of conflict and controversy, in particular, like the way the organization started, which was to really focus on the community that was at least visibly affected, and that was white gay men in
Mhm.
West Hollywood. Those are the people that the news was covering. But meanwhile, on the other side of town, there were just as many cases of African American young men. There were drug users or intravenous drug users who were being affected, and they were not getting the same kind of coverage or the same kind of care. And those communities had to start their own institutions, and APLA wasn't necessarily addressing their needs at the beginning. So there was a lot of tension there, which ultimately was resolved. And we showed that in the film. And APLA let us go there and encouraged us to go there to
Mhm.
show that it's not always easy to form allyship across lines of different communities.
Yeah, and that's one of the comments I do remember getting where people said, I really, really appreciated the fact that you talked about all the diverse communities within Los Angeles, not just kind of the white gay male community, which, was a huge struggle because all the money was coming from, the white gay moguls and and it was a disconnect for them that we were in very small parts of downtown helping, drug users or trans people or something like that. So yes, you are correct that they were very interested in telling the whole story, kind of warts and all, if you will.
And we were so lucky to get Jewel Tace Williams
Yeah.
to talk to us. She was one of these incredible activists. She ran the Catch One nightclub, which was a big gay disco, and she, was addressing the needs of her community, the African American community, because she saw it, running that club. Her patrons from the club, the people who work with her at the club, she was seeing so many people get sick and dying. And she used her club as a community, a place of healing, to literally put food in people's mouths, to get people information, to get people medicine. A lot of it was underground. A lot of it was just cobbling together money where they could to have a cookout, instead of
Hmm.
a commitment to life.
Right, yeah.
But ultimately, she was on the board of APLA, so people listened to her, and the folks at APLA were smart to bring her on board at that
Hmm.
time.
Now, let's bring in Allison. You, I think, were the one who found Allison, and obviously, music plays such an important part in especially a documentary because it really helps kind of reinforce the story, drive the narrative. I think you had kind of an idea in your head what you wanted this to sound like, and you introduced us all to Allison, and we're so glad you did. Talk a little bit about creating the sound and the soundtrack of Commitment to Life.
Well, I'd wanted to work with Alison for such a long time. I knew her work over the years. There's a wonderful film called Limited Partnership, which I'd seen, which is about an early gay marriage case and the two men who were part of that. And I just loved Alison's score. We'd met a couple times over the years, and I said, when the time is right, I want to work with this person. So Commitment to Life just seemed like the perfect opportunity to do that. And Alison, I want you to talk about your process, but I remember, you go through the movie. I had temp score, which is, other people's scores that you use as a sort of just a temp. But I used all of Allison's music from her other movies to use as temp. So
Mhm.
we knew that it would have a similar feeling and emotional. And her scores for me are just so emotional. It really taps into the heart. And I remember that the first thing was to play sort of a theme. What was the theme to Commitment to Life going to be? And I remember the first time she played it for me, I just burst into tears. It's like that's never happened before. And I've worked with some brilliant composers, but this was just incredible. And then I just trusted her to do the right thing. And I would love for you to talk about that. What was that process like for you?
Oh, it was awesome. Yeah, and I think similarly, Jeffrey, like I'd been following Jeffrey's work for, a long time as well. I remember I was at the premiere of Veto at Outfest, and that was the first time I saw one of Jeffrey's films, and I was like, damn, who is this guy? How do I track him down? And yeah, so when I got that first email from Amy, and I was like, oh my God, Jeffrey Schwartz wants to work with me. I'm like, that's a like very exciting. So I was really excited about it. Just because of the history of your films, your as a filmmaker, the kind of your subject matter, the way you make films is just like really, I think, like we're definitely on the same page. There's a same kind of documentary filmmaking that I love doing. So when this project came about, yeah, I mean, it to me, like after having done limited partnership, which definitely taps into the similar kind of history, backstory of gay marriage, the AIDS crisis. This was just, it was like it's all part of that story sort of thing. So it was like going back into a world that I had deeply kind of been in as well. So I think I already felt like a very intuitive connection to a lot of this material. Obviously, Jeffrey had been temping with a lot of my score and stuff like that. And I was like, I think it's kind of like we knew what the tone of this was going to be in terms of the instrumentation. We knew he wanted, it's Hollywood, it's a Hollywood story film about the AIDS crisis. But so that sort of, you start thinking about orchestral, you start thinking about strings, you start thinking about like something that's epic. And this is an epic story as well. It's over a long period of time. It goes through generations. It's a lot of emotional ups and downs. So it's all that kind of stuff. But after I think I saw, and this was early cut as well, I think probably around the 4 hour cut at this point in time where there was a lot of material. But I was sitting in my studio one day and I suddenly was like, wait a minute, there's the whole gay man's chorus. Let's like what that we have to use the gay men's chorus. Like it doesn't make sense to do this score without using the gay men's chorus. It was like so glaringly obvious kind of thing. And then I called Jeffrey and I was like, I think we need the gay men's chorus. And he was like, oh, yeah. Like it was like the penny drop kind of thing. And so we just at that point, I think then called you also, Ron, was just like, how do we do this kind of thing? And it was like, oh, okay. And it just, I mean, obviously they were very, I mean, they were very, very open to it and so generous with their time. And I mean, I was just so excited to do that kind of thing. And so that's when I played that thing with Jeffrey, who was just like, well, how are we going to use the chorus? Like, what's that going to sound like? And I think it was like, until I showed him that first mock-up of like, oh, we're still using an orchestra, but the chorus is going to be basically part of the score. It's part of the fabric of the score. It's not singing songs, but it's actually wound into the sound. And then once he heard that, he was like, oh, okay, now I understand what you're talking about, kind of thing. And so it kind of went from there, really.
Pretty brilliant, and it does add so much, and it also gives us the opportunity to highlight some of the wonderful work that the Gay Men's Chorus did during
Exactly.
the AIDS crisis as well. So it just tied in beautifully all around.
Once all the music was like written and everything, and we started going to those rehearsals, Jeffrey and I went to the first rehearsal, and that was like, again, everyone was crying. It was like so emotional, just hearing them sing for the first time. And it was just like, oh my God, kind of thing. It just really, yeah, it was incredible. And then when we went to the scoring stage, I think it was just also having those people that would like had lived through it as well, that was still in the chorus. That was to me, it was just like, oh man, this is incredible. So I just think, I mean, it's just all these things like add up in storytelling. They really do, especially in documentary filmmaking. All these things are so meaningful and they help just, tell this story in the most, I think, authentic kind of way.
Our scoring was full live instruments. It was not any synthesizer, and I think you were pretty much.
No, it was all, well, that's not entirely true. I used there's some synths in there, but if they're synths, they're intentionally synths, like
Oh.
they're like, Juno synthesizers and like there's stuff in there, but the vast majority of it is pretty much all orchestral. Piano, we did piano, we recorded guitar, recorded about a 30-piece string ensemble. Then we did the
And
choir.
that was offshore, correct?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
did it
we're
in Budapest.
Budapest. I'm amazing.
Yeah, and
I think
then
when Amy told me that, I'm like, wait, what?
yeah. Yeah, it's you can do all these remote recordings now. It's kind of it's that was a really fun day too. Big long recordings. I think we did 6 hours of recording strings that day. Somehow or other, by some miracle, these things come together.
Yeah.
I mean, I think with every time I know for me, every time I write a score, there's this moment of like, is this all gonna work? Am I
And
gonna pull
Jeff,
this off?
yeah.
There was a lot of music, and it was
Yeah.
all different kinds of music too, because you had sort of the emotional,
Mhm.
very intimate, inside of hospital rooms or bedrooms or private homes, and that's one kind of a feeling. And then you have epic, street protests and ACT UP and the Prop 6, the attempt to put people with HIV in
Another
concentration
quarantine.
camps,
Yeah.
now we're talking about concentration camps again in 2025. There was so much. And in terms of the Gay Men's Chorus, they're part of this story. Steve Peters, Reverend Steve Peters, was one of the members of the chorus, and he told us, so many of those original members died. Told stories about he would go to rehearsals, and there'd be a whole bunch of guys, and then one week some of them would show up with IV tubes or canes, and then the next week they wouldn't be there at all. And so to have that DNA of the Gay Men's Chorus and those voices in the film is just so meaningful, and I'm just so grateful that it all worked out. And I know Amy, you worked really hard to make sure that the chorus felt that they were contributing in a meaningful way, because it was a lot of wrangling to get them. First of all, they were always willing to do it, always very, very agreeable to do it. But then it's like, well, it's not the entire chorus. It's like I don't know how many were there at
I
the
think
end of the
there
day.
was about 20 or 20 to 25
Wow.
choristers. Yeah. So yeah, it was I mean that's a decent that's a lot of singers, but it's not like the whole like 100 piece. So they basically, and when I think we spoke to the choral master, he explained that, how many, because at first it was like, how big is this chorus going to be kind of thing. And then once I had that conversation with him, he understood, oh, okay, we don't need like 100 choruses. We need like an ensemble.
I did want to also mention that one of the really super important portions of the film is kind of the archival footage and the stock footage and kind of the old news reports. And that, I believe, all kind of just ended or landed on the desk of Aimée, and how that all came together and what that process was like to even to find it, to license it, to negotiate it, all that. Aimée, can you talk about that?
Really fortunate. I mean, we had, as always with filmmaking, it takes a little army. So we did have some incredible archival producers up in San Francisco who came on at the very beginning when we were just figuring out what the story was. It was like, okay, well, we're gonna find the story is gonna reveal itself to us, and we will know what it is, but we need to go out there and just find out what exists. And then they worked with us for about a year. I mean, this film is very archival heavy. There's a lot of archival elements in this. It was myself, Jeffrey, and our co-producer Taki. Taki really dug in and did a lot of the work on the archival also.
It was really a treasure hunt, and aside from the materials that APLA had in their archive, it was the Commitment to Life events, obviously, but also photographs and newsletters and memorabilia, and also, amazingly, there had been other videographers over the years who, I think there was like a 20th anniversary documentary, and also in the first few years, there was a videographer who shot Beta SP interviews with, they would call them buddies. So the buddy program at APLA was incredible, and it was matching up a person with AIDS and a friend who they probably didn't know before, but this friend would just be there for them, take them to the doctor's office, take them grocery shopping, sit around and watch the Golden Girls with them, just hang out. And there were interviews. There was this interview with one of the guys, Billy, and his buddy, which we were able to use in the film, and it's just so emotional. There was the um the food pantry that APLA ran in the early days. There was video of that. There was an interview with a young man who had AIDS and was there at the food bank, and he was saying how that it's like the only place he feels like welcome, because there was so much stigma, there was so much fear. Families were rejecting their kids with AIDS. Some doctors wouldn't see them. It just goes on and on and on. So for this kid to be at the APLA food program and to be there and know that people wanted him there, it was so meaningful to him. So that footage would just never have been seen before. So I'm just so grateful that it survived.
And you also stumbled across a series that Allison Argram was hosting called at the time, which was AIDS something or other, and like where did it air?
Wow.
And I mean, even to be that insightful to do something like this in a public kind of information kind of way.
Yeah, Alison Arngrim, who was an early volunteer, she was also Nellie Olson from Little House on the Prairie. She was an actress, and she had a co-star on Little House who ended up having AIDS and going public, and she became a volunteer, and she was there from the very beginning. She was incredible, and because she had a show business background, she wrangled together a series. It was called AIDS Vision, and it was a weekly public access local. I don't know what channel it was on, but it was a local public access show. And amazingly, I think all the episodes or most of the episodes survived. And it's her interviewing all kinds of people from APLA, people who were living with AIDS, performers, activists. I mean, it's incredible. So we used a lot of that in the film, but also I just love to make this stuff available to people. So Ron, you were so great, and APLA was really great in allowing me to release a lot of this material on YouTube. So we have the entire run of AIDS Vision on YouTube, and I see all the comments. I see people are recognizing people that they knew. I have a friend whose former boyfriend was on the show, and he couldn't believe it. And so it's just been really gratifying to see that we were able also to put up a lot of the clips from Commitment to Lives over the years, and there are fans of certain people who, have never seen this stuff. So we had, Bette Midler getting her award or singing a song, and the Bette Midler stands are out there like going crazy. Like Madonna also that's another part of the story. I would love, Amy, for you to talk about the music, not the score, but the licensing of some songs that we wanted. We wanted to use a Madonna song, Into the Groove, and because Madonna was an early supporter of APLA, appeared at some Commitment to Lives, and we wanted to use one of her songs. So how did that go?
It actually went really smoothly. I mean, we had a fantastic music supervisor. It took a while. It took a long time of talking to her people and people talking, going back and forth. But at the end of the day, she really
Hmm.
licensed to us for a very, very reasonable amount of money that was shocking and also so generous that we were able to use these films, this music rather, because it was really it was wonderful.
Michelle Johnson was the music supervisor, and she's someone that I've worked with a number of times on a few different projects, and she's great. Because I remember talking to her about the Madonna thing and about the getting the license. I'm like, I'm pretty sure you're gonna be able to get that. She's like, I feel like we're gonna get it. And I was just like, yeah.
Well, she encouraged us to write to the artist personally, and so for a gay man of a certain age to write a letter to Madonna was fairly special. And
Are you
it's just,
kidding? Let me start right now.
I mean, but she's Madonna, but she's just a person who
Yeah.
really cares.
Oh yeah.
Especially at that time, she had so many friends who had HIV. She had people in her backup dancers who were in Truth or Dare, who some of them had HIV, some of them passed from AIDS. Keith Haring was a close friend of hers. I mean, the list goes on and on. So she was able to grant us permission. There was also another song from Hairspray called I Know Where I've Been, which is a beautiful song. And that song is sung in the context of the civil rights movement in the 60s, but I mean, it really applies to the our movement and to the HIV AIDS movement. And Scott Whitman and Mark Shaman, who were the writers of the song, I know them both, and they were just so supportive. And they were part of Commitment to Life, so it's their story too. So I don't know, it all worked out. Everything, obviously there were a lot of stresses along the way when you're making a documentary like this, but it all worked out the way we wanted it to. I think we made a great film.
Well, so let's talk about the ending because I wanted to bring that up too. It was such the perfect, kind of encapsulation. I know where I'm going, or because I know where I've been. That great song from Hairspray. When did you come up with this idea? I mean, was it? Did you know it immediately? Like this is how I want to end the film, or was it just something that kind of, as you were editing, went, "Oh, let's try this. Oh, this kind of works."
Yeah, the song, I love the song, but I was looking for clips from of the Gay Men's Chorus to use in the film potentially. Just I pull lots of stuff off from wherever I can find it, and I found this clip of Alex Newell, the singer, and they were there singing a song with the Gay Men's Chorus of Los Angeles for some event. It wasn't an APLA event, but it was just so beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And I just thought we need a big finish. We need a big ending that's musical and kind of ties all the threads together and gives people hope. We reached out to Alex and got permission from Alex's folks to use the song. We got permission from the publisher to use the song. And I think it's just a beautiful encapsulation of everything we've been through.
We did get our premiere at the Santa Barbara Film Festival, and I think that was kind of a very, very interesting, unique, and appropriate place to do it because it was in California, in kind of Southern California, and it was the story of Southern California. Tell me about, your impression, Jeffrey, kind of with the big debut. You've done these before. How did it compare? How did you feel on opening night, seeing it, doing the red carpet?
Well, you spend so long on these films and you're really with this just small core group of people and it can get lonely sometimes, and it just takes a long time. It can be grueling. Sometimes it's like crawling through broken glass to finish a movie, but what gives you the feeling to finish and keep going is like that opening night where you're going to be with an audience. And in the age of streaming, nothing beats sitting in an audience with people. And so this was our world premiere. Nobody had seen the movie yet. And we had a lot of folks from the film there with us who walked the red carpet. Steve Peters was there. He was already ill at that time. He's one of those people, thank God we got to him when we got to him because we lost him, a couple of years after that interview. But anyway, Allison Argan was there, and just walking that red carpet, talking about the movie, engaging with young people on the red carpet. There were like young teen reporters I remember on the red carpet we spoke with, and we showed the movie. It was a packed house. There was not a dry eye in the house, and it was just wonderful. We were all there, and that's really makes it worthwhile. And that's the beginning. So when you have a world premiere like that, then you just travel to other festivals, and we played the film all over the world.
What was interesting is I think for the most part, we made the decision to wear old school red ribbons when we were at premieres. And I think it was at Santa Barbara where a very young reporter said, "What are these red ribbons that you're all wearing? And what does that mean?" So, it was I think the film has been an incredible vehicle for education to another generation. And I know that in some of the screenings I went to and chatted with people, it was the younger ones saying, I had no idea anything about this. So we've got young LGBT folk who were really being educated as to, where we've come as a community and what happened to us as a community. So that was kind of, all the paycheck I needed.
Yeah, that was incredible. So, yes, engaging with young people. This stuff is not taught in schools. And now there is an active effort to erase our history. So, engaging with young people, but also engaging with folks who live through this. My neighbor, he lost so many friends in his life and cared for them when they were sick. And he came to see the film, and it touched something in him that he hadn't been wanting to think about or to address, but it was able to engage with his own past and the people he lost through our film. And I remember holding him in the lobby after the film and him sobbing in my arms. And that's not the first time that that happened. I'm just so grateful for the people who have come out to see it because it is a challenging movie. And sometimes people might want to go see Wonder Woman instead, but they came out. We screened it in London at the BFI Flair Festival, and that was incredible. That was also incredible. We went on the BBC to talk about the film and to spread the word. So it's played all over the place. And
Mhm.
we've have been lucky enough to attend some of these screenings, but it has a life of its own at this point.
I believe we played somewhere around 40 plus 45 festivals over the course of the festival season and a year. And what blew me away is, when the requests would come in, it would be anything from, a small LGBT film festival in Oklahoma or something to London. We played Sydney, Australia. We pay like major international cities as well as some very small towns here domestically. So that was really kind of special to see kind of the wide range of audiences that we were hitting with the film.
It's powerful. And I'm
Mhm.
just even just thinking about those experiences now, they're just really moving to me.
Mhm.
And I love to watch the people watching the movie.
Mm.
I love to see the faces, and I love to see, and I look and there's like tears streaming down people's faces and young people, so that's why we do these kinds of films is to
And you guys
reinvigorate.
don't forget about like our hometown screening at Outfest
Very good point. Thank you, Alex.
because
We
like
did.
that was like
Yeah,
video
to
one.
screen at the Directors Guild and their main theater in Outfest in Los Angeles to a packed house. But of course, at the same time, NBC and Peacock began a conversation with me as well. Peacock came through with a nice kind of 1 year licensing deal on the film, and we were thrilled to be able to be on their platform for a year. And also included in that was what they call a linear broadcast on cable television on MSNBC.
That platform specifically it reaches such a wide audience, which is essentially like at the end of the day, you do want it to reach as many people as possible so that, and I think that like, I mean, it's one thing obviously for the queer community to see this film and they've lived it and they experienced it, but for everyone else to see it and sort of hear the history of it, especially after having now gone through COVID,
Hmm.
it rings true or a little closer to the bone maybe than maybe it did in the past. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, they were connecting the dots a little bit and
Yeah.
like, oh wow, that's,
Yeah.
so familiar. And our standard line is we made a movie about a pandemic during a pandemic.
I mean, sadly, where we're at right now with current state of affairs in this country, how relevant this film now is as well.
Well, yeah, the funding cuts, the cuts to Medicaid that have happened recently, and this is obviously being recorded in mid-July. APLA Health is basically an FQHC. It is a federally qualified health center. It is funded by Medicaid dollars. So, we are helping people because of Medicaid. And most of rural America, poor rural America, is taken care of through Medicaid. So this is a huge attack
Mm.
on underserved communities, minority communities. We've come so far to build programs like this to help people. To watch it all be cut back
Mm.
tremendously is just unbelievable to me.
And even in like within like Los Angeles, I know I've got friends that work at the LGBT center, and the funding, the cuts, people are being fired there. The cuts are huge. Like the HIV testing sites are being shut down all over the city right now.
Yeah, because I mean, generally, they're funded by county dollars. County dollars are funded by federal dollars. So it's a domino effect. It's just another attack on our community.
It's infuriating, and it's also we're also having attacks on the truth, and
Oh, yeah.
we have a guy now, I'm not going to mention his name, but he's basically in charge of the health of America who doesn't believe HIV is the cause of AIDS. And this is a conspiracy theory that dates back to the beginning. And I thought we were past this. I thought we had advanced. Also, something that struck me in Commitment to Life is every administration, including Republican administrations, continued the Ryan Care Act, which was the framework, the federal framework to distribute dollars for HIV and AIDS funding, the Ryan White
Ryan White,
Care
yeah.
Act, which was signed by every president. We show it in the film. We show both Bushes signing it. There was no controversy about that. George Bush, the second George Bush, was responsible for PEPFAR, which basically addressed HIV in Africa and has saved countless millions of lives. That's being cut back and destroyed. This is not a controversial idea that we need to save lives around the world. And now we're turning our back on that. So I feel that, I hope in my heart that we're living through a very dark time right now and that sanity will ultimately prevail. But I don't know what the answer is. But this film shows us how to fight back. We were in a place in the 1980s where, we had a president that ignored this, was actively hostile to the community. We had some of the same people who are in the administration now, or some of those same people who wanted to put us in concentration camps in the 1980s. These are the same people, and if they're not the same people, it's the same philosophy,
Theology.
and so we have to be vigilant, and some of that funding that was cut for Los Angeles, this could change tomorrow, but my congresswoman was very key in restoring a lot of that funding to Los Angeles. And I just called her this morning to thank her for that. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
we have to be vigilant, we have to fight, and we have to make sure people know this is going on.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the takeaways from the film is that we learned to fight for ourselves during the AIDS crisis. And if we didn't, I think we would have been extinct. That spirit and that fight continued, and I think you make the connection well with marriage equality. And we're being asked to fight again, or we're being forced to fight again. You know?
Yeah. But it's the
And
young people now, the younger generations who can like see this film and actually learn from it and be like, oh, it wasn't always like this. It wasn't, we didn't always have all these freedoms kind of thing. They were fought on the backs of many lives. So yeah.
Right. And one of the messages of Commitment to Life is, nobody's coming to save us. So we have to save ourselves and we have to take care of each other. You have to step up as an individual, and single individual people can make a difference. That's what
Mhm.
happened with APLA. These were not activists at the beginning. These were friends whose friends were sick and dying. They said, we need to do something about this. They didn't rely on the government to come save us because they didn't give a crap. No, we're living in the same time now. We have a government that I think is just trying to cull the herd, wants a lot of us just to disappear or not be on this planet anymore. So it's a lot worse than I think it was in the 80s, but we're visible now. We're visible in a way that we weren't in the 1980s, you
Yeah,
know.
but we still need to be bigger, louder, bolder, and gayer than ever.
We're just living through a incredibly dark time right now. We're recording this July 7th, 2025. We don't need to go through every single horrible thing that's happening right now, but it's a terrible time, and healthcare is being ripped away from people. And I think what this film shows is, nobody's going to come to save us, and we have to save ourselves. And we have to be activists. We have to work as individuals. We have to team up with other people. We have to, and regular people can make a difference. I mean, this film shows that regular people change the course of an epidemic that was on track to destroy our community, and it didn't.
From day one, my goal was always to educate and inspire, and to really inspire that next generation of activists. And this is the time we need them. Most of us in this generation we still have fight in us. We still know how to fight, but we really do need the next generation to step up as well. We kind of handed them a really nice kind of existence, and they never knew what it was like to be attacked. Now they do. So we're hoping that, they're inspired to kind of continue the fight that we started and for the most part succeeded for the longest time.
As artists, you want to come together and make the art about the stuff that's going on around you, and I think this film does that. We use the things that we know how to do best and use them as tools to educate and share stories. And I think that's very powerful. So I think we just have to keep doing that.
This is when artists, I don't know where we're going to get our money from, because there's a lot of grants are getting slashed. A lot of, if you work in this area of storytelling, these are stories that they want squashed and they don't want it being distributed. But we have to continue making these. I mean, this is when artists have to come together and just keep being, like you said, loud. And just for me and my documentary work, I do narrative films, fiction films, and I do my documentaries, but I feel like the documentaries are a place that I can really just fight. I can fight.
And the funding issue is very important. And I'm glad you brought that up, because this story would not have been told if we did not have the backing of APLA Health as the sponsor, the fiscal sponsor of this. I get calls all the time from either friends or friends of friends who are making a documentary, and I know what they want to know. Where can I get money? And the fact is, it's the money's not out there, and it's really, really, really hard to raise enough money to tell these great stories in a documentary fashion. And I just, I hate to be kind of like the downer, but it's the toughest part of doing this. And we were so lucky to be able to have the financial backing to tell this story and to memorialize these people and the fight and honor what they've done.
At a time where we're dehumanizing all these different groups, the films like this can rehumanize. And that's so important right now. We need to keep telling these kinds of stories,
Oh,
whether it's about HIV/AIDS or any number of things that are happening in the world right now. And things do look really dark and grim right now. And I hope if someone is watching this years from now, this is a period of time that we all went through together and we came out at the other side intact, bruised but intact.